Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife review for you, and this is going to be my full review of the RealSteel E802 Horus. So there's the name there. Now, I've got to say, you know, if you've been watching this channel for a little while, you know I've been fairly impressed with RealSteel. They tend to do a pretty good job with construction and quality and stuff like that, at least in my experience. And so I'm sure, you know, it's no big surprise that I'm fairly happy with this knife as well. There are a couple design features that I'll talk about that I'm not so sure about. And I should point out that if if you're wondering about the style or whatever, this is available in all black, and it may be available in brown. I feel like maybe I saw one out there somewhere with brown layered G10 instead of the blue layered G10, although don't quote me on that one, okay? Nice blue hardware on this, and one interesting feature is that the screws here, both the pivot screw and down here the single standoff at the back, are both hollow, so you can actually see through them. Now, I'll speak to that a little bit when we get to sort of construction and handle ergonomics and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, for now, let's go ahead and start off with the size and weight. This guy is 8 9/16 overall, okay, so that's the full length there. 3 5/8 inch blade, 4 15/16 handle, so right there close to 5 inches. And this weighs in at a little bit of a hefty 5.1 ounces. So 5.1 ounces, I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it's a little heavier than I sort of would anticipate for this knife. Although, you know, when you take a look at it, it's fairly thick G10, nice thick steel liners. And while we're on that subject, let me say this. I do like to see a thicker steel liner. So this is more comparable. I know I'm onto construction now, but this is more comparable to the thickness of the Rat Model 1, and it might be even a little bit thicker than a Rat Model 1. So that's something I do appreciate. Anyway, let's carry on with the details. I was just wanting to explain where that 5.1 ounces comes from just a little bit. Point out that it's just a little over half an inch thick. And in terms of carry, you know, this guy goes in the pocket pretty well. Now, I'll have more to say when we get to the pocket clip, which I do like, but I won't speak too much about now. I'm more concerned about size and if it feels uncomfortable or overly heavy or something like that in pocket, and it really doesn't. I find this knife completely comfortable to carry around with me. The blade is a 14C28 drop point blade with a stonewash finish. Fairly high flat grind, and I've got to say overall I'm a real fan of this blade. I think they've done a really good job sort of balancing. Let me flip this over this way for you. Notice that it's fairly thick and it keeps that width quite a ways out here. So it's still a pretty fine point, but overall I would say this is a pretty robust blade, okay? It's definitely thin enough behind the edge that it cuts really nicely, and it's a good slicer, but it's maybe not as crazy thin as some of the knives I've had. And so again, a bit of a nod to being a bit more utilitarian, a bit more bulky and harder to break, a little longer lasting. And 14C28N, by the way, I feel like has a pretty good reputation along those lines. Certainly as a steel, I prefer it over most of the budget steels, and even, you know, I would be, you know, I don't want to say this definitively, but in most cases I would even prefer it over VG10 or 154CM, although those are, you know, it's probably in the same ballpark as those two, and you'd be hard pressed to really notice a big difference between them. Great edge retention, you know, takes a really keen edge, and of course this used to be the steel that was in all the Kershaws until they stopped kind of doing that. Which was a little bit sad to see because it's a great steel. So that's the blade, and I am overall quite impressed with it. It slices really well, but they haven't just made it so paper thin that it is, you know, going to break easily. Now, this knife, like any knife, if you drop it straight on the tip on a concrete sidewalk or something, yeah, the tip's going to break, or you're going to, you know, if it falls on the blade, you're going to mess up your edge. That's pretty much true of any knife, so just be a little bit careful and don't drop it on the sidewalk. All right, let's see here. Anything else to say about the blade? I think that's about all we have to say. So let's talk about lockup and deployment. You can take a look there and see that it is a liner lock, and it's a fairly thick liner lock. Let me, let's see, what have I got to show you here that I can give you an idea. You saw the Rat Model 1 a minute ago, so let's pull up a couple of knives here. So there it is with the Rat Model 1 and then with the steel wheel cut jack. And you can see it's even a little thicker, it looks like, than the Rat Model 1 and definitely thicker than the cut jack. So that's appreciated. I do like to see a thicker piece of steel on that lock bar. And the other thing that I like is that there's no relief cut. There's no, if you look along here, they haven't cut into this to make it thinner in a certain portion to allow this to bend easier. It definitely bends more than easy enough. And this is one of the thicker lock bars that are out there on a liner lock. So the fact that this knife can do it just fine, you know, really, if you're watching this in your company who's making liner lock knives, just forget the relief cut, okay? Just leave me the full piece of metal because it does add some extra strength there. So I do like that. In terms of action, this is a very, very smooth knife. It is on bearings. The detent, I will say, I don't think, well, I can do it if I go off camera. Let's see. I can't do it on camera, but if I really whip this hard with my arm, I can get it to deploy without touching the thumb stud, which is, you know, in Canada that could be a bit of an issue. I like to see knives a little bit stronger than that. But in all honesty, unless you really are trying hard to get it to happen, it doesn't just automatically fall out of there, okay? So the detent is actually pretty comfortable. And one advantage to that is, you know, because of that detent being just moderate rather than super strong, it's pretty comfortable to flip this knife out. And I can even, well, hopefully, there we go. And I can even spidey flick it, which is kind of nice. So the action on this, the detent, is pretty nice, and the ball bearing and the bearing pivot is very smooth. Now, the one thing I will say is I don't feel like a knife like this needs to be on bearings. Yes, it's smooth. Yes, it's kind of fun to play with, but it's totally unnecessary as far as I'm concerned. And in fact, it may be a detriment if you're going to use this knife in a really dirty, grungy environment where there's potential for stuff to get into those bearings. There is, of course, a chance that you could mess those up. Not the end of the world, you know, squirt some WD-40 in there and you're good to go, but still, there is that potential with any bearing knife. Now, in terms of, you know, just the ease of use on this guy, it's pretty good. And of course, I do like the fact that it's thumb stud deployment. It's nice to see that for a change in, you know, a knife community, knife world where it seems like every knife has to have a flipper on it. So it's kind of a welcome change of pace. While we're talking about the flipper, the thumb studs, let me just show you that one. Just from riding around in my pocket, and I think riding in a pouch in my bag with a couple other knives, it did get a little bump on it, and it's missing some of the blue. So that tells me if this was your EDC like for the next 5 years, probably after the first year or two, you're gonna lose some of the blue there. And notice the standoff there at the back has a scrape on it as well. So, well, it looks really nice. There is the potential for some damage there on that blue hardware. So lockup and deployment, overall, yeah, very impressed. It is a Torx bit, so you can tighten or loosen this as needed. And I did find it coming loose a bit on me, so I just dropped a little bit of Loctite in there and closed it. And it's never given me a problem since that point. Let's see, lockup and deployment, that covers it all. Let's go ahead now and talk about the handle and the handle construction. You can see, of course, that it's a liner lock. Oh, wait. Good thing I turned the knife over. I completely forgot about the secondary lock, and this secondary lock works like most of them do, just by putting a little piece of metal in the way of the lock bar, so now I can't disengage it. Okay, it is there. I literally never touch it. That's probably the 3rd time that I've ever moved it just for this video. And now I will say this, it's very unobtrusive. Notice how it's hardly even noticeable, and I think that is really nice because they know probably that the vast majority of us who are using these knives are not going to use that secondary lock, and so making it very unobtrusive and almost not noticeable is appreciated for guys like me who don't really feel the need for it. Okay. All right, now we'll talk about the handle now that I've covered that last point on lockup and deployment. So we've got a stainless steel liner lock here with layered G10 that is milled out pretty nicely, and it's an attractive handle, guys. I really do think so. The G10 is textured really well. It's sort of a nice balance. Let me see if I can show you maybe from this side. If you look in there, I think you can probably see pretty easily that the liners are milled out to save some weight only on this one side. So it's possible they could have shaved a little bit more weight off this, but 5.1 ounces is not the end of the world, as we said before. The one thing that is interesting is, you know, there's 2 points of contact here and that's it. And they are hollow, okay? So I'm sure that they've done some stress testing and stuff. And the reality is for, I don't know, the vast majority of us, that's not going to make any difference whatsoever. Those hollow screws, they're just kind of a nice aesthetic touch. It makes the knife a little bit different, but doesn't detrimentally affect performance in any way. Does it reduce the strength a little bit? Well, maybe a very little bit, but look how thick that rear standoff is. So with that kind of diameter, I don't think you're going to have any influence on the overall strength of the knife by making those hollow. Now, one thing I will say about this is if you're going to do it, it would have been nice to see them go just a little bit bigger. So it became kind of immediately obvious, you know, that when you look at this, you go, whoa, those things are hollow. That's kind of cool. This way, you can't really tell. You really have to take a close look before you realize, oh, wait a second, I can actually see through there. And you can see I'm actually having a hard time showing it to you on camera. So it would have been nice if you're going to do that and make it sort of a feature of the knife, then make it a feature, you know, make it stand out so that people right away can pick up on that. The pocket clip is two-way repositionable, and it is a nice bent over deep carry clip. I've got to say, I really, really like this clip. I think it's an improvement. It's just a little simpler and a little classier than the clips that RealSteel has been using. So I would be really, really happy if they switched to this clip for most of their standard models rather than the one that you see on the H6. Okay, so I do think this is a nice clip and it works really, really well, just in and out of pocket without any problems. So I've got to say I'm a fan of that, and I actually am a big enough fan of it that I would really appreciate it if they just went with that on all the knives. Now I do have to make some comments about the aesthetic, or I mean the ergonomics here. You know, the way that they've got this cut out here, it kind of makes you put 2 fingers up here and 2 fingers back here, okay? And now, I'm not sure where they want your thumb to go. I guess up here where they've got this bit of a swoop, and that's fine, but naturally it wants to land right about there, and you can see there's kind of a hump there, so it doesn't land perfectly. Normally what I do is if I'm cutting something, I grab the knife like this, and I go, oh yeah, and I just move my thumb forward a little bit. So it's not the end of the world, but aesthetically it would have been nice to see something else happen here, or even extend this thumb ramp a little bit, make it another 1/4 inch longer, and then my thumb could fit there pretty comfortably. As it is, you kind of have to move up here to be comfortable. Now, if you move back on the knife, yeah, then it works really well, and your thumb actually does land on the thumb ramp, and almost, and you will, by the way, I did once or twice accidentally turn this lock on. Now, the other thing that's missing here is any kind of jimping, and so some jimping on that blade spine would have been very appreciated. All right, now outside of those things, all right, when I actually use the knife and I'm doing cutting tasks with it, I find it quite comfortable. I don't really have any problems with it. The handle is definitely large enough that even though right where I kind of want to grab it is not perfect, I've got enough real estate that I can move around a little bit and be very comfortable on the handle. So that's sort of, what would you say? It's not amazing, but it's certainly not horrible either. Let's go ahead and get some comparisons. Since we're talking about overseas knives, I have a few for you. Beginning with what I think is actually a really, really nice knife, and probably in a similar price point. This is the Vanguard series from Kaiser, and this is the Intrepid. I've got another Kaiser as well, but this guy, I've been really impressed with this. This is VG10 steel rather than the 14C28N, but very comfortable, very grippy G10. I definitely like this knife. The lock bar tension is a little higher and it's not quite as comfortable, but otherwise, you know, a very comparable knife. And if you're, you know, you're kind of looking for a bearing flipper in a little more budget-friendly range, I think that's a good option. Another flipper from Kaiser, and I guess this one is a fairly popular one for them. I'm not absolutely crazy about this design, and I'll speak to that when we do the full review on this guy, but there is the Dorado, okay? And I will say the action on the Kaisers, The detent is just a little bit stronger, and so the action they deploy maybe with just a little more authority. Two standard knives that I always compare to pretty much any liner lock that we get, especially ones that are aiming for that budget market a little bit. There is the Rat Model 1, and there is the steel wheel cut jack. Both of these are very good. By the way, I went camping with the cut jack. It performed really well, but it has developed just a little bit of rust there, and that's part of the game plan with D2 steel. Now, it's my own fault because I should have chosen another knife for the day I was going swimming, but what can you do, right? So anyway, there's the steel wheel cut jack, which is smaller, and the Rat Model 1, which is kind of bigger, more like the same size, but I will say, look at the extra cutting edge you get with the RealSteel, and I do definitely appreciate that for sure. A couple other sort of more budget-friendly offerings. Let's grab the Kershaw right here. What Kershaw is this? Of course, they didn't put the name on it. The Kershaw, it's like the Fusion or something like that. Recently reviewed. Sorry, I can't come up with the name. Someone put it in the comments below if you wouldn't mind. But this is, you know, a more budget-friendly knife. 8CR13 MOV. I don't know where where those numbers went all of a sudden. And it does have the speed assist. And I've got one other for you, and this is again a fairly budget-friendly fairly budget-friendly G10 stainless steel liner lock. So fairly comparable in construction. This does have bearings as well. It's a flipper. It's 14C28N. The rake P105. There we go. P105Q. All right. Now I think you can kind of imagine one of the reasons I like satin finishes is look how pretty that blade looks compared to this one. This one's a little more understated. By the way, I do like this blade design just a little bit better. It's a little more robust than the rake, but I kind of like the finish on the rake. So there we go. Those are the comparisons I have for you. I guess I shouldn't move this one out of the way. We'll keep it around while I give you my overall take. In overall, guys, I think that this is a nice knife from RealSteel. I think they've done a good job in terms of construction. I think it's an attractive design. Pocket clip is a big win. Blade shape, great. As an EDC knife, I think, you know, it's well done. And I would say it can actually go a little beyond EDC, although I wouldn't maybe consider this a super like tactical knife. Largely because there's not a whole lot of traction plan going on. So as an EDC, yeah, I have no problem with it. And frankly, that's, you know, basically what we carry knives for. It could do with a little bit of traction, and that's about the only big complaint I have. I think it's a great knife, interesting design, definitely an overall win. So if you like the design of this guy, I don't think there's any reason to hesitate on pulling the trigger. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.